If you're thinking about buying a super shoe, specifically a super shoe by Saucony, they've done some amazing things over the last couple of years. This video is for you. Today, we are comparing the Saucony Endorphin Pro 3 with the Saucony Endorphin Elite. Let's get into it. Let's start off with price, because price is a pretty big thing. The Saucony Endorphin Pro 3 retails for $225, but it's likely you can find it for less than that. The Saucony Endorphin Elite is brand new. I mean, it was just released at the making of this video, and it will cost you $275. So if you would just go into paid retail, we've got $225 versus $275. That's a big difference. But let's talk specs. The Saucony Endorphin Pro 3 has 39.5 millimeters of stack in the heel, 31.5 millimeters of stack in the forefoot for an 8 millimeter drop. Compare that to the Endorphin Elite, which also has 39.5 millimeters of stack in the heel, 31.5 millimeters of stack in the forefoot, also for an 8 millimeter drop. Got to be some difference, right? It's got to be weight. The Saucony Endorphin Pro 3 in the US men's size 9 tips the scale at 7.2 ounces or 204 grams. The Saucony Endorphin Elite also weighs 7.2 ounces or 204 grams in a US men's size 9. Wait a second, these are both the same weight? Well, how about in my size, a US men's size 13? Well, the Endorphin Pro 3 tips the scale at 8.9 ounces or 251 grams. The Endorphin Elite, in my size, a US men's size 13, tips the scale at 8.8 ounces or 250 grams. So in my size, the Endorphin Elite is 1 gram lighter than the Endorphin Pro 3. So clearly a substantial weight savings of 1 gram in the Endorphin Elite. Okay, jokes aside, there are more to these shoes than just the specs. And just so you know where I'm coming from when I am reviewing both of these shoes, I've had the Endorphin Pro 3 for a little while, well, over a year. I have run 3 marathons and 2 half marathons in the Endorphin Pro 3, like it became my race shoe of choice. And I haven't yet raced in the Endorphin Elite. However, I have been doing a lot of my speed work, so my tempo runs, my intervals. I even went out for a 20-mile long run in the Endorphin Elite. So I put a lot of volume in the Endorphin Elite, I just haven't taken it out on race day. But I've done enough where I think I have a good grasp on the differences between the Pro 3 and the Elite. So let's talk about the Pro 3 first. Pro 3 has what I think is typical for Saucony around their heel collar. We've got just a very minimal amount of padding, and this amount of padding actually works very well. I never have any problem with discomfort around my heel and my ankle on any Saucony shoes. The heel counter of the Pro 3 is quite rigid. We can actually see that heel counter right there. It's that wide, it comes up. I don't get any heel slip in the Pro 3, and this upper, as you can see, is just kind of shimmery like a mermaid, and it's like a dual layer, except the second layer is just a very shiny, thin filament, really doesn't do anything. And then the main bulk of the upper is this very airy mesh. It's quite soft to the touch too. There are very minimal overlays on the Endorphin Pro 3. We've got some running down the eyelet chain. We've got the Saucony branding, the Saucony logo just here on both sides. And then we've got an underlay coming right around the toe box and around the medial side, just giving a little more structure to this upper, just so it stands up and it doesn't collapse in. All in all, I find the Endorphin Pro 3 extremely comfortable. This is a nice shoe to put your foot in. It feels like a race day shoe. Let's talk about the upper on the Elite, because there's a lot more going on. Let's start with the heel collar. Now remember I said that the Pro 3 had this traditional Saucony level of cushioning around the heel collar. The Elite does not. The Elite is more like a sock. It is one very thin layer of kind of a knit material that comes around, so it doesn't give you that same protection, that same padding around your heel collar. However, with that said, guys, I haven't noticed any detriment to not having that padding around the heel collar. So I don't want you looking at this and saying, oh, that's gonna bother me. It's probably not going to bother you at all. I didn't notice anything. The heel counter on the Endorphin Elite doesn't exist. Look at this. It's just a knit material all the way around the back. However, if I push down the heel, we can see this right here, this little kind of heel loop. It wraps around your heel. So when you put your foot in, this kind of holds your heel in place, almost like a heel counter, and it does an extremely good job. It holds my heel in place, and even though you would think that with a heel with this much flexibility in it, you might get a little bit of heel slip, I also didn't experience any heel slip in this. I think this is a great way for Saucony to save weight on their shoes, even though it's the same weight as the Pro 3, and still maintain the protection that we need in a race shoe. Now, as far as the rest of the upper, remember we've got this knit material from about here back all the way around to the same positioning on the medial side, and then forward of that knit upper we have a thin single layer mesh. Super light, super breathable, but you are noticing a lot of overlays on the Elite. Like we have this band that comes from the middle of the laces, it comes down the sides, wraps around the carbon fiber plate on the bottom, and then comes up and wraps around and kind of ties in to the midfoot here. And clearly this band here is to ensure that you have a good midfoot lockdown. We have some overlays running along the eyelet chain and then some clear plastic overlays just coming along the side just to give that structure to the upper. And then we have an overlay right around the toe box. Again, same thing the underlay does on the Endorphin Pro 3. This overlay on the front of the Endorphin Elite just serves to keep that upper away from your toes to give you a little bit of room in the toe box area. No complaints about how they've done this. In the looks department, I think the Endorphin Elite, it looks kind of busy, right? There's a lot going on here. Whereas the Endorphin Pro 3, I don't know, maybe I'm just used to it a little more. It looks a little more reserved, a little more laid back. Although I don't think I thought that when I first got the Pro 3, but because I'm so used to it now, it's just, you know, I've normalized it. The tongue on the Endorphin Elite is just super, to say it's a race day tongue is an understatement, but there's no other way to describe it. It is just, there is nothing there. It is just a thin piece of faux suede, and it is gusseted on both sides of the tongue, so that tongue isn't going anywhere once your foot goes in. And then you can see, if I hold it up, you can see this very wide mesh along the length of the tongue, ensuring that you are getting a lot of ventilation. The Endorphin Elite is a very ventilated shoe. Any heat that's generated by your foot is just going to dissipate into the environment. Now look, there's no padding down the center of the Endorphin Elite's tongue. And while I would usually look at that and I think, oh, are these laces gonna bite into the top of my foot? That wasn't my experience with the Endorphin Elite. It all fit together very well. The Endorphin Pro, on the other hand, look, it also has a very thin race-inspired tongue. It's super thin, however, not as thin as the Endorphin Elite. And as far as the rest of the tongue goes, when it comes down to the vamp of the shoe, we've got these 3 big holes that provide for ventilation. Remember, all that foot heat just dissipating. You're not going to have any problem with the Endorphin Pro 3 being ventilated enough. This is a very aerated shoe. Again, there's not too much padding. There is probably a little more padding on the Endorphin Pro 3 than there is on the Elite, but I also didn't experience any lace bite. I did get a good midfoot lockdown on the Pro 3, and the same with the Elite. One difference though, one difference between the Pro 3 and the Elite, I want you to look at the laces. Specifically, I want you to look at the eyelet chains and how close they are together. You see on the Pro 3, they're quite close together, but at the bottom, like right here, on the bottom of the Elite, the eyelet chains are almost touching. Like I have those laces cinched very closely in order to get a good lockdown. So what that tells me when I look at both of these shoes is that perhaps the volume in the Pro 3 is just a little less than in the Elite. Look, I've got to say that the volume in both of these shoes is probably too much than ideal, or more than ideal for my foot shape. I think my foot might be just a little narrow. But if I were to compare both shoes, even though I think when I put my foot into the Pro 3, I do have to cinch them down quite tight, the eyelet chains do get close together, it actually fits a lot better when I compare it to the Endorphin Elite. So perhaps if you have narrow feet, the Endorphin Pro 3 might be a better option, even if it's just because the laces look better when they have a little space between them. I do have to say that for me, this is just aesthetics. I'm just moaning about how it looks. Because even though the eyelet chain is very close, especially right down here at the front of the shoe, it didn't affect how the shoe felt on my foot. Like I still got a good lockdown. The shoe still felt good. I didn't feel like I was swimming in the shoe. So I was able to lock it down enough, even though I have to cinch it down very tight. Okay, let's talk about the main differences. Obviously, look, when we look at these shoes, clearly they're a little different, right? But the main difference is in the foams. And the Endorphin Pro 3 is using Power Run PB. The Endorphin Elite is using Saucony's brand new state-of-the-art Power Run HG. Both shoes have a carbon fiber plate. However, the Endorphin Elite does have a slotted forefoot, which supposedly is going to work for a wider range of people. So if you favor the medial or the lateral side on your toe off, the carbon fiber plate in the Endorphin Elite may work better for you. Personally, I didn't really notice a difference in that department, but there it is. The main difference that I want you to take home with you is the feeling of these foams underfoot. Power Run PB is very soft. The Power Run PB is more like a traditional super shoe. And we all know that what makes a shoe super is the combination of the carbon fiber plate and the foam that it is sandwiched in between. And the Pro 3, to me at least, feels very traditional like a super shoe. It feels very soft, and yet when you pick up the pace, that rebound, that energy transfer from the foam seems almost deceptive from how soft the foam is when you're running slower. Does that make sense? I don't think the forward propulsion from the carbon fiber plate is as aggressive in the Pro 3 as the Elite, but also the Power Run HG foam is remarkably firmer than Power Run PB. In fact, I would say that Power Run PB kind of feels like it would fit right in between the feeling of the Pro 3 and the feeling of the Pro 2. Remember the Pro 2 and how firm that shoe was? I didn't even run a marathon in the Pro 2 because I just thought it was too firm for me. I thought I need a little more cushion if I'm going to be out there running for over 3 hours. So when the Pro 3 came out, it ticked all the boxes. It was exactly what I was looking for in a race day shoe. Now, when I first put on the Endorphin Elite, like my first couple miles, I was left thinking, oh, you know what? I was expecting something softer. This is a little bit of a firmer ride. It's not as firm as the old Endorphin 1 and 2, but it's certainly not as soft as the 3. I wonder if this is really going to work for me. But I would almost say that the Power Run PB is the Goldilocks zone of foam thickness. Or maybe not the Goldilocks zone because that kind of indicates perfection, but it is right in between the Pro 2 and the Pro 3 as far as how firm the foam feels. Now, Saucony has put a lot of research into the Power Run HG, and this is their most responsive foam. So if you are a numbers person, if you just want what is best, the specs put out by Saucony clearly indicates that Power Run HG foam does return the most amount of energy. There's no getting around that. And after my extensive testing in the Endorphin Elite, I have come to find that this shoe feels remarkably well. I've actually grown to love the feeling of the slightly firmer foam. And I definitely will be running a marathon in the Endorphin Elite. Up until this point, I have just done a lot of tempo runs. I've done a lot of intervals. Basically, most of my fast work has been done in the Endorphin Elite. So I'm very used to how this shoe feels. Let's just talk about the outsole for a minute, because if we look at it, there is a clear difference. Now, both shoes, the Endorphin Pro 3 and the Endorphin Elite, seemingly have a lot of coverage on the forefoot area of the shoes. And when we come down to the heel, we can see that on the Endorphin Elite, we have this piece of rubber right here on the lateral edge. We have the same piece of rubber on the lateral edge of the Pro 3. However, on the Pro 3, we also have this little piece of rubber on the medial side. And on the Elite, we have gone without it. Probably a weight saving measure, and this is something that you probably can't see on camera, but it looks like the outsole rubber on the Pro 3 is probably just a little thicker than that on the Endorphin Elite, which tells me that the Endorphin Pro 3 is probably going to last you a little longer than the Endorphin Elite. And if we look on the outside, so this lateral heel on the back, right where I heel strike, is getting a little bit of wear. And at the making of this video, I think I've probably run 50 miles in the Endorphin Elite, and of course several hundred miles in the Endorphin Pro 3. And I do have a little bit of wear on the Power Run PB foam, but honestly, I think I have, where am I looking? I think I have more already on the Endorphin Elite than I do on the Pro 3. So here's the thing. The Endorphin Elite is $275 and the Endorphin Pro 3 is $225, but you can probably find a deal somewhere because it's been out for a little while. Look, I get it, the Endorphin Elite is the #1 shoe. This is the new thing. This is the thing that everybody wants. It is the fastest shoe that Saucony has ever made. And before I actually finish that thought, I just want to show you the toe spring of these two shoes, and we can see that it's just a little more pronounced in the Endorphin Elite as compared to the Pro 3. And what that means to me, at least when I'm comparing both of these shoes, when I've been out and I've been running and I've been racing and running fast like I have in the Elite, is that the Endorphin Elite just feels a little more aggressive. And maybe you've seen my individual reviews of both of these shoes. They're both out and available, or maybe a comparison of my Elite against some other super shoes. I actually said that the Endorphin Elite is a pretty good all-rounder, but, and this is a big but, it's only a good all-rounder if you're comparing it with something that is not as good of an all-rounder. And if I had to choose one shoe that would work for most runners, I am going to go with the Pro 3. I think that the Pro 3 is just a little more forgiving of a shoe. I think it's going to work for a more wide range of paces than the Elite. And if I'm honest, I think the Pro 3 actually feels better at a longer distance than the Elite. However, even though I haven't run a marathon in the Elite, I am going to say, just by my training, just by my testing of this shoe, I would say this shoe is going to lead to better performance. For me, at least. I think it just feels faster. Now, what I also think is that I'm probably not going to feel as good at the end of a race in the Endorphin Elite as I do in the Pro 3, just because the Pro 3 with its Power Run PB is just a little softer. I think it's a little more forgiving. But I've got to say, I think the Elite is going to be a faster shoe. Now, back to my previous thought about who these shoes are good for. Even though this is the faster shoe, I think more people are going to get value out of the Pro 3, and I think they're going to use it for a wider range of runs. And on those runs, use it for a wider range of paces. So while I get it, I get wanting the latest, newest, shiniest toy, the Endorphin Pro 3 is not exactly an old shoe. And if you're looking to save a little bit of money, and perhaps you're not the fastest runner out there, but you still want to get the best out of yourself that you can, I think the Endorphin Pro 3 is probably the better buy at this moment. And then when we look at the outsole rubber, I also think the Endorphin Pro 3 is going to be a little more resilient than the Endorphin Elite. Guys, I'd love to know what you think. Have you run in either of these shoes, the Pro 3 or the Elite? Let me know in the comments. If you choose another super shoe for racing, let me know what that is too. My name's Matt, this has been my review of Saucony's Endorphin Pro 3 versus the Endorphin Elite. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.